What would you do if your life and the life of your newborn child was threatened right in front of you? Imagine this: a peaceful neighborhood where everything seems calm and serene, suddenly turning into the setting of a nightmare. On one ordinary afternoon, a mother, trying to navigate the overwhelming responsibilities of raising her newborn, finds herself at the mercy of a woman who has let hostility take over her every move. The woman, a Karen from the Homeowners Association, has been nothing but trouble, but nothing could have prepared anyone for what happened next. In a moment that felt like it lasted forever, the tension boiled over. In an attempt to control, to dominate, the Karen moved toward the mother and her child with anger in her eyes and malice in her heart. What followed was a confrontation that no one in that quiet neighborhood could have predicted. The mother, frightened for her child, tried to defend herself, but it was a battle against someone much stronger and much more ruthless than she ever imagined. For a few seconds, the Karen's rage took over, and in an instant, she attacked the mother and even made a horrifying move towards choking the helpless newborn. But then, something happened. In the space of just 2 minutes, the unthinkable unfolded. What happened next stunned everyone, leaving them speechless. A moment that could have ended in tragedy instead brought a shocking turn of events. What caused this woman, seemingly normal on the outside, to snap? Why would she lash out in such a violent way at a mother and her defenseless child? And how could such a nightmare end in a way no one could have predicted? Stick with us as we unfold the chilling details of this real-life story, a story of survival, terror, and a twist that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this neighborhood. What happens next will shock you, and you won't believe how it all ends. It was a typical afternoon in the suburban neighborhood of Crestwood, a place known for its tranquility and close-knit community. Lush green lawns, white picket fences, and quiet streets made it the ideal place for families to settle down. Neighbors often greeted each other with smiles, and children played together in the yards, creating a safe and peaceful atmosphere. For most, it was a sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. But behind the picturesque facade, a storm was brewing, one that would soon shake this peaceful community to its core. Sarah, a new mother, had recently moved into the neighborhood. Her life had already changed dramatically since the birth of her son, Ethan. With sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn, Sarah was navigating the ups and downs of motherhood, doing her best to adjust to the new normal. Every day felt like a balancing act, managing the needs of her baby while trying to find moments of peace in the whirlwind of diapers, feedings, and baby cries. Her husband, James, worked long hours, leaving Sarah to handle most of the daily challenges alone. One particular neighbor, Karen, was an influential member of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a woman whose presence loomed large over the community. She was known for her strict adherence to rules, her uptight personality, and her tendency to meddle in other people's affairs. Sarah had encountered Karen several times in the past, each meeting more uncomfortable than the last. Karen had taken issue with the way Sarah's lawn was maintained, the type of garbage can she used, and even the color of the curtains visible from her window. But it wasn't just the small matters. Karen's attitude toward Sarah was overtly condescending and rude. The tension between them had been building for months, with Karen finding any excuse to complain about Sarah's home and lifestyle. At first, Sarah had tried to ignore it, chalking it up to Karen's overzealous sense of authority. But as time went on, Karen's demands grew bolder and more invasive. Sarah, exhausted and overwhelmed, had begun to avoid her at all costs. But that afternoon, things took a violent turn. It started like any other day. Sarah was in the front yard, holding Ethan in her arms as she tried to get some fresh air. She smiled at the sight of her baby's peaceful face, momentarily lost in the calm of the moment. But that peace didn't last long. Karen, walking her dog, approached Sarah with a look of determination on her face. There was no greeting, no pleasantries, just the sharp tone of someone about to make an accusation. The confrontation began with a complaint about Sarah's front steps not being properly cleaned, a minor issue in the grand scheme of things, but one that seemed to set Karen off completely. Before Sarah could even respond, Karen's face twisted with anger. The words that followed were harsh and unforgiving, each one designed to criticize and belittle. As the tension escalated, Sarah felt a wave of frustration and fear rise in her chest. She had no idea that what began as a simple complaint would turn into a confrontation that would change her life forever. And as Karen's anger mounted, it became clear that Sarah's attempt to simply live in peace was about to be violently interrupted. The encounter between Sarah and Karen began innocently enough, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. The moment Karen stepped onto Sarah's property, it was clear that this wasn't going to be another routine complaint. There was an edge to her voice, a sharpness that made Sarah's stomach tighten with anxiety. "Your steps," Karen started, her voice cold and commanding. "They're dirty." The HOA has strict rules about cleanliness. Sarah, holding her newborn son Ethan, had been trying to catch a moment of peace in the small patch of front yard that had become her refuge. She wanted to respond with calmness, to brush off Karen's latest critique. But something about Karen's tone made her feel as though she were being cornered, pushed into a situation that she couldn't escape. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the street, and there was a crispness to the air, almost like nature was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. "I've been busy," Sarah managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll get to it, Karen." She turned away, hoping the conversation would end, that Karen would just walk away like she always did. But Karen wasn't having it. "Busy." Karen scoffed, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing. "You're always busy. That's the excuse you use every time." She stood rigidly in front of Sarah now, blocking her way. "What kind of mother are you, letting your house fall apart like this? Don't you care about your neighborhood? Or your child?" Sarah froze. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the fury bubbling up inside her chest. The words Karen spat at her were like daggers. What kind of mother? She clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. Her baby boy, Ethan, stirred in her arms, his tiny body beginning to wriggle. The weight of him, normally comforting, suddenly felt like a burden in her arms. She knew she had to protect him, but Karen's presence made everything feel like it was spinning out of control. "You don't know anything about me, Karen," Sarah said, her voice shaking, trying to stand her ground. "I'm doing the best I can. Just leave me alone." Karen's face darkened. Her eyes flared with a kind of rage that Sarah hadn't seen before, and for a split second, she regretted saying anything at all. Karen's smile was gone now, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. The space between them seemed to close in an instant as Karen took a step forward, her voice now a low growl. "You think you can get away with ignoring the rules? You think you can ignore me?" Before Sarah could react, Karen's hand shot out, grabbing the edge of her shirt, yanking her forward. The suddenness of the move caught Sarah completely off guard. Panic surged through her veins, and her heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively pulled Ethan closer, clutching him to her body. Her breath hitched as she tried to back away. But Karen was relentless, pressing her body into Sarah's, forcing her against the stone steps. "Stop! What are you doing?" Sarah gasped, her voice trembling. Her heart was racing, and every inch of her was screaming for her to escape, to run. But Karen was too close, too powerful. Karen's grip tightened. "You're a disgrace," she hissed, her breath hot, on Sarah's face. "You don't deserve to live here. You're nothing." In that moment, everything went black except for the noise around them. The sound of Ethan's frantic cries pierced the air. The faint smell of freshly mowed grass mixed with the sudden, pungent scent of Karen's perfume, thick and overpowering. Sarah's mind was spinning. Was this really happening? Was she really being attacked by her neighbor? Then, without warning, Karen's hands, now uncomfortably close to Ethan, moved toward the baby. Sarah's blood ran cold as she saw Karen's fingers encircle the tiny neck of her newborn. A cold, numbing terror washed over her. "No, not Ethan. Please, no." Everything in Sarah's body screamed for action, but she was frozen in place, the terror locking her in place. The world around her began to blur as she tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding before her eyes. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly, Only one instinct remained: to protect her baby. The world seemed to stop for a moment as the air crackled with raw energy. Sarah's heart raced, her skin clammy with sweat. All she could hear was the ringing of her own heartbeat in her ears and the frantic, desperate cries of Ethan. The yard around them was still, save for the two of them, locked in a dangerous struggle. The once peaceful neighborhood had turned into a battleground. The seconds felt like hours as Sarah's mind raced to catch up with the chaos unfolding around her. Karen's hands were still gripping her shirt, pinning her against the stone steps with terrifying force. Every inch of Sarah's body was screaming for her to escape, but she was trapped, a captive to Karen's unrelenting rage. The baby in her arms had stopped crying, perhaps in sheer terror, or maybe out of the fear that even the slightest sound would make things worse. Sarah's heart raced, her hands trembling, her thoughts a blur. She felt the weight of Ethan's small body, a burden and a blessing at once. She had to protect him. There was no choice but to fight back. The shock of the attack made Sarah feel as if her body had gone numb, but the motherly instinct to protect her child surged through her with a clarity that cut through the fog of fear. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts, but the need to act overwhelmed everything else. As Karen's grip tightened, Sarah felt a flash of fury unlike anything she had ever experienced before. This woman had crossed a line. Her baby. This was no longer about neighborhood rules or petty complaints. This was life or death. With all the strength she could muster, Sarah pushed forward, using her arms to shield Ethan and to break free from Karen's grasp. She pushed her knee into Karen's stomach, knocking the air out of the woman with a gasp. For a brief moment, Sarah had room to breathe, but Karen wasn't backing down. She recoiled, eyes blazing with a fury that sent chills down Sarah's spine. For a split second, Karen seemed to hesitate, but that hesitation was short-lived. With a guttural growl, she lunged again, this time aiming her hand directly at Ethan's tiny neck. It was as if every ounce of humanity had drained from Karen, leaving only a cold, venomous shell. "No, don't you dare!" Sarah screamed, her voice hoarse, as she instinctively raised her arms to protect her son. The world around them seemed to blur as adrenaline coursed through Sarah's veins. She grabbed Karen's wrist just as the woman's hand reached out, narrowly missing Ethan. The strength in her grip was almost unnatural. Her fear, now a burning fire that fueled her every move. "Get off me!" Sarah shouted, her voice breaking, but she was desperate, not caring about anything but keeping her baby safe. Karen's eyes narrowed in disdain, and with a violent jerk, she wrenched her hand free. The two women grappled, Sarah doing everything she could to protect her son while trying to fend off Karen's aggression. It was a battle of sheer will, desperation against rage. Sarah's mind screamed at her to run, to take her baby and run as fast as she could, but her feet were rooted to the ground. She could not move. She could not leave Ethan. Then, in that moment of intense struggle, something changed. The sound of a car door slamming shut echoed down the street. The sudden noise broke through the tension in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound, her heart leaping in her chest. Was someone else here? Had someone heard the chaos? From the corner of her eye, she saw a figure approaching. Another neighbor, Jason, who lived 2 doors down. Jason was a tall man with broad shoulders, and while he wasn't known for getting involved in neighborhood disputes, Sarah knew him to be someone who wasn't afraid of confrontation when it mattered. He had seen the confrontation from his front window and had rushed out to help. "Hey, what's going on here?" Jason's voice rang out as he sprinted across the yard, his eyes widening in disbelief at the scene before him. Sarah, struggling to regain control, screamed, "Help me! She's trying to hurt my baby." Jason's gaze snapped to Karen, who, for the first time, seemed to hesitate. Her face, once twisted with fury, now appeared uncertain. For just a second, Karen faltered, as if the appearance of a witness had shaken her resolve. Sarah took advantage of the moment. She shoved Karen backward with all the force she could muster, sending the woman stumbling off balance. Karen crashed to the ground, her eyes still filled with fury, but now with a hint of fear. Jason was on top of the situation in an instant, rushing to Sarah's side. "Get away from her," he barked at Karen, stepping between the two women. His presence was commanding, his voice unwavering. He put a protective arm around Sarah and Ethan, stepping in front of them like a human shield. Karen, still on the ground, glared up at them, her face contorted in rage. But now there was no power in her. The situation had shifted, and for the first time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Her chest heaved with relief, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she clutched Ethan to her chest. But even as the tension seemed to ease, the fear remained. Karen wasn't done. The look in her eyes told Sarah that this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. "What are you going to do now, huh?" Karen spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you won? This isn't over. You're going to regret this." Jason glanced at Sarah, his face filled with concern. "We need to get you inside. You're not safe out here." But before they could move, Karen stood up, brushing herself off. She took a deep breath and wiped the dirt from her hands, her eyes still locked on Sarah. "You've made a mistake," Karen said, her voice low and dangerous. "You'll see." As Jason guided Sarah toward her front door, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind was reeling, still trying to process what had just happened. Was it really over? Was she safe now? The feeling of relief was fleeting. The story wasn't finished, and Sarah knew it. Karen's words echoed in her mind, leaving a dark cloud over what was supposed to be a moment of safety. Would this truly be the end of it, or was this only the beginning? The moment Jason stepped between Sarah and Karen, a sliver of hope pierced the fog of panic clouding her mind. His presence felt like a shield, and for the first time since the attack began, Sarah felt like she could breathe. But even as Karen stumbled backward, her eyes still seething with venom, Sarah knew deep down that they weren't truly safe yet. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. This wasn't a one-time conflict. It was a battle for survival, one she couldn't afford to lose. Jason turned to Sarah, his voice calm but firm. "You need to get inside. Now, we're not safe here anymore." For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, her arms instinctively tightening around Ethan, who had started crying again. The baby's tiny cries were like a reminder of the fragile life in her hands, and a surge of protectiveness overtook her once more. She glanced over at Karen, who was slowly rising to her feet, her face red with fury. Sarah could see the wheels turning in Karen's mind, and she knew that the woman wouldn't let this go. But for now, they had a chance to escape. With Jason blocking Karen's view, Sarah quickly backed toward her front door. She didn't dare turn her back on Karen, not with the look of rage still burning in the woman's eyes. Every step felt like an eternity, her heart racing as she tried to move quickly, but cautiously, afraid that one wrong move would make Karen lash out again. When Sarah finally reached her door, Jason turned to face her, urgency in his eyes. "You need to lock the door behind you, Sarah. We don't know what she's capable of." With trembling hands, Sarah fumbled for her keys, finally managing to unlock the door. She stepped inside and slammed it shut behind her, bolting it with all the force she could muster. She leaned against the door, her body shaking, trying to steady her breath. The fear that had gripped her moments earlier had morphed into something else entirely, something primal. She wasn't just scared anymore, she was furious. Jason was already speaking through the window, his voice muffled but clear. "Karen needs to be reported. I'm going to call the police." Sarah nodded, but her mind was spinning. She needed to get herself and Ethan somewhere safe. She could hear Karen's angry shouts from the yard, her words indistinguishable but full of rage. She wasn't done, Sarah knew that. This wasn't the end. Jason hung up and turned to her. "I'm going to stay here until help arrives. We can't let her get away with this." But even as Sarah nodded, a feeling of dread settled over her. She wasn't sure what was worse, the immediate attack or the slow-burning fear that now gnawed at her every thought. The danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Immediate consequences inside her home, Sarah tried to calm herself, but the panic lingered like a heavy fog. Ethan's cries had softened into a whimper, but she couldn't help but feel that something had shifted in him, something that couldn't be undone. She gently rocked him, trying to comfort him with soft murmurs, but the tension in her own body seemed to transfer to him. Every time he whimpered, Sarah's heart cracked a little more. Her baby had been threatened. He had been held in the grip of a woman whose sole goal seemed to be to hurt them. What if she had succeeded? The thought was unbearable. The immediate effects of Karen's attack were undeniable. Sarah's arms and chest ached from where Karen had gripped her, bruises already beginning to form. Her legs felt weak, as though she hadn't fully processed the shock of what had happened. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the exhaustion of the ordeal began to set in. But what tore at her the most was the memory of the moment when Karen had lunged for Ethan, her tiny baby. That moment was seared into her mind, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Karen's hands reaching out, those cold fingers threatening to harm her son. As Sarah sat on the couch, rocking Ethan, she glanced out the window. She could still hear Karen's shouts, though they had softened into something more sinister, a warning perhaps. It was clear now that this was no ordinary neighbor dispute. This was a person who was willing to cross every line for control and power. And Sarah had no illusions anymore. If Karen could do this in broad daylight, she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Across the street, a neighbor had emerged from their house, looking over at Sarah's with concern. The woman was watching the scene unfold, her phone in hand. Sarah could feel the weight of the community's gaze. They had all seen what happened. This would not be something that went unnoticed. Would they be supportive? Or would they blame her for provoking the situation? The silence that followed was almost worse than the yelling. The unknown stretched out before Sarah, a chilling reminder that even though she was inside her house behind a locked door, the danger wasn't over. Tension outside, Sarah could hear the sound of sirens approaching. Her heart leaped with a mixture of relief and dread. This was the moment. Everything would change now. But what would happen when the police arrived? Would Karen face consequences for what she had done? Or would she find a way to twist the story and make Sarah the villain? Sarah knew how manipulative Karen could be, and she feared that the narrative might get turned around. The HOA Karen was well known in the neighborhood, and her influence extended beyond just her aggressive behavior. She was someone who knew how to play the system. As Sarah sat there, cradling Ethan, her mind raced through possible scenarios. The police would come, sure, but what about after that? What would the community think? And Karen? Would she escalate things further? Sarah's stomach twisted at the thought of Karen returning, more dangerous than ever, seeking revenge for her humiliation. Karen had already proven that she was willing to do anything to make Sarah's life miserable, and now, with the police involved, Sarah had no doubt that Karen would stop at nothing to make her pay. As the sirens drew closer, Sarah stood up, abruptly, holding Ethan close to her chest. She knew that they couldn't stay here forever. They had to leave. Even if the police arrived and handled the immediate situation, they needed to make a plan. They needed to get out of this neighborhood. They couldn't afford to wait around for Karen to make good on her threats. Jason's voice broke through her thoughts as he knocked gently on the door. "Sarah, the police are here." With one final look around the living room, Sarah knew what had to be done. She had to be strong. For Ethan. For herself. She would face whatever came next, but she would not be bullied, and she would not let this woman destroy her peace. As she opened the door, she braced herself for what was to come. The first steps in what felt like an endless battle were about to be taken. But no matter the outcome, she wasn't going down without a fight. Not again. As Sarah stood in the doorway, the sirens in the distance grew louder, signaling that help was finally on the way. The tension in the air felt like a thick, suffocating fog. She clutched Ethan tighter. The weight of the baby in her arms, a reminder of the battle she was fighting, not just against Karen, but against the fear and uncertainty that had taken root in her heart. The police were coming, but what would happen next? Would Karen face consequences for her actions, or would she find a way to twist the situation to her advantage? Jason was still standing by her side, his expression grim but determined. "We've done everything we can. The police will handle it from here," he said quietly, but Sarah could hear the doubt in his voice. He was just as uncertain as she was about what would unfold when the authorities arrived. As they waited for the officers to approach, Sarah felt her thoughts racing. There was so much about this situation that didn't make sense. The way Karen had acted, so cold, so angry, so completely unhinged, couldn't be explained away by petty neighborhood complaints. Sarah's mind began to drift back to the earlier confrontation, replaying the moment over and over in her head. Why had Karen attacked her? Why had she targeted her newborn baby in such a violent manner? And why was she so angry? That's when it hit her, the realization that changed everything. Sarah's stomach lurched as she pieced together the fragments of the past few months. Karen had been relentlessly antagonizing her, but there was more to it than that. She had always seemed to be particularly fixated on Sarah, her house, her lawn, her lifestyle. But it wasn't just about rules. There was something deeper, something that Sarah hadn't been able to see until now. Karen wasn't just upset about the trivialities of neighborhood life. She was obsessed with Sarah's family, with the way Sarah had everything that she herself had lost. And then the chilling truth came to light. Karen had lost her own child. The thought hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had seen Karen's demeanor soften in passing moments, had noticed the subtle glances she cast toward families with young children. Karen was alone, always alone. Sarah remembered how the woman had once casually mentioned something about the way things used to be when she saw Ethan in Sarah's arms. The offhand comment had struck her as strange at the time, but now it made sense. Karen had lost a child, maybe through an accident, maybe to something more sinister. Whatever the reason, the deep grief she carried had turned into something much darker. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was an obsession, a twisted need to control, to tear apart the happiness she saw in others because she couldn't bear to see it in herself. The realization hit Sarah like a wave. It was clear now that Karen's attack had been driven by something far deeper than just neighborhood rules. Karen's rage had been fueled by her unresolved pain, and Sarah's family had become the target of her misplaced anger. In a way, Sarah and Ethan had represented everything Karen had lost, and she couldn't stand it. Before Sarah could process the full weight of this revelation, the police car pulled up to her driveway, the blue and red lights flashing in the dimming light. 2 officers stepped out, their faces serious as they approached. Jason quickly explained the situation, giving a brief but urgent account of what had happened. Sarah, still reeling from the truth she had just uncovered, struggled to steady herself as the officers turned their attention to her. One officer, a woman with kind eyes, looked at Sarah with concern. "Are you all right, ma'am? Do you need medical attention?" she asked gently. Sarah nodded, her voice shaky. "I'm okay. I'm just trying to understand why this happened." The officer nodded, her expression softening. "That's what we're here to figure out," she said. "We'll take care of it from here, but you don't need to face this alone." As the officers began to question Karen, who had remained eerily silent, Sarah's thoughts returned to the revelation that had shaken her to the core. She wasn't just dealing with a disgruntled neighbor, she was facing someone who had been consumed by grief and loss, someone who had let that pain turn into something dangerous. Sarah's heart raced, and for a moment, she considered confronting Karen once again. She wanted answers. She needed to understand why the woman had acted the way she did, to face her and demand to know the truth. But as she stood there, watching Karen being led to the police car, something held her back. The desire for confrontation, the need for closure, felt distant now, like a fleeting thought that was quickly slipping away. No, Sarah realized, this wasn't the time to face Karen. She had to let go of the need to understand everything. She had to trust the police to handle it. Confronting Karen would only give her more power, more control over the situation. The truth was painful enough, and there was nothing Sarah could do to fix Karen's broken past. With a deep breath, Sarah made the decision. She would let the authorities handle Karen. She wouldn't give in to the urge to fight back with her own anger. The only fight that mattered now was to protect her family, to keep them safe from the damage that Karen's obsession had caused. As the officers took Karen away, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she had made a choice. She had let go of the need for vengeance and focused on what truly mattered: her family's safety and the future they would build, free from the shadows of the past. It wasn't the end Sarah had imagined, but it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would rise above the pain and the fear, stronger and more determined than ever. As the officers escorted Karen away in handcuffs, the weight of what had just transpired began to settle on Sarah's shoulders. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The police had taken Karen into custody, and though she hadn't been charged with anything just yet, it was clear that an investigation would follow. Karen's actions weren't just the result of a petty dispute, they had escalated into something far more dangerous. The officers assured Sarah that her safety would be prioritized while they gathered evidence and statements from witnesses. The process was slow, but it was moving forward. Sarah was informed that Karen would face a series of legal consequences, including charges of assault and endangerment. In time, she would have to stand trial where her past actions would be scrutinized. The police assured Sarah that this was not something they would take lightly. The damage Karen had done to Sarah's life and to the safety of her child would not go unpunished. But as Sarah stood in her living room, the weight of the situation was slowly starting to lift. Jason remained by her side, a constant presence of support. He had called her family, and by now, they were en route to make sure she had all the help she needed in the coming days. The community, too, was rallying around her. Neighbors had come forward, sharing what they had witnessed, and many offered words of comfort, some even volunteering to watch over Sarah's house when she needed a break. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of order returning. Sarah knew there was still much to process, but for now, the most important thing was that she and Ethan were safe. Karen was no longer a threat. The house was locked, and the night was peaceful again. The sound of Ethan's gentle breathing as he finally drifted to sleep, a soothing reminder of the fragile peace she had fought so hard to preserve. In the days that followed, Sarah found comfort in small moments: quiet mornings spent with Ethan, visits from supportive neighbors, and the knowledge that the authorities were on her side. There was no going back to the normalcy of the days before the attack, but she had emerged from the ordeal stronger, more resilient. And so, the chapter closed, not with the resolution of all things, but with the certainty that Sarah had taken back control of her life. The road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but she was ready to face whatever came next. Her family was safe, and that at last was all that mattered. The journey that Sarah and her baby, Ethan, have been through is nothing short of harrowing. What began as a quiet day in a peaceful neighborhood turned into a nightmare, testing Sarah's strength and her ability to protect the one thing she loves most in this world. Her fear, her anger, her determination, all of these emotions collided in an instant as she fought not just for her safety, but for the safety of her child. This experience has forever altered her. The woman who once found peace in her home now carries the weight of that fear, but she also carries the knowledge that she fought back, she fought for her family, and she won. It's a painful reminder that not everyone is what they seem, and sometimes the true dangers we face come from the places we least expect. Sarah's relationship with her community has changed too. Where once she may have felt isolated or vulnerable, she now knows that there are people who will step up, people who will stand with you in your darkest hours. The support she's received has not only healed some of the wounds caused by Karen's actions, but has also reminded her of the power of unity. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you have done in this situation? How would you have handled the intense fear and pressure of protecting your family? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking real-life stories from the HOA Stories. Your support means everything as we continue to bring you the most gripping, emotional stories from the world of homeowners associations.